Hey guys, so I'm going to be making a quick recording about these notes and what you're doing with the timeline. If you hear some fun noise in the background, the twins are here playing games, and so they may beat something and be excited or lose and not. So if someone yells, they're okay, I promise. So what we're doing today is you're going to take this timeline, which you can see over here, and I have color-coded. So these two lines are for the Albany plan. You're supposed to summarize the Albany plan and put the year. I think that might be the only one I need to put and see if I can add into the notes or give you a hint about, or you could just Google it because most of you know how to. The rest of them are in the notes over here. So the first thing, I gave you an example. It says the Navigation Acts. These are a series of law put into practice by the King of England that put the theory of mercantilism into practice. Mercantilism is a system where you want to sell more than you buy, which obviously makes sense. So the King of England was in the system of selling more than he bought, so he would buy from the colonists at a really low price. He wouldn't pay them very much, and then he would sell them back a finalized good at a high price. So if he bought cotton from them, then he would buy it real cheap and then would sell the clothing or whatever back to the colonists at a really high price. So this will keep the colonists fairly poor and unhappy about the whole situation. So that's what mercantilism is. I'm going to have probably done some other notes that include that word, and you've got some vocab coming up that do that, but I only have so much time when I do Screencast-O-Matic. So you're going to take, instead of filling in the blank notes, you're going to take this set of outline notes over here where my cursor is, and you're going to use these that I'm going to talk you through right now. Remember, you can always pause the video and you can look at things. Also, page 57, which is in chapter 2, gives you some form of a timeline, but it does not give you everything that is on this screen or that we'll be talking about. Okay, so I'm going to pull the presentation over, and I'm going to go through that. So I'm going to have to go back up to the beginning, I do believe. Sorry for all the scrolling. All right, so we're talking about how the American Revolution starts. So events leading to American independence. All right, so the French and Indian War, if you ever watched The Patriot, this is part of that. It's at the very beginning. Mel Gibson, who is the main character, or one of them, doesn't actually want to fight in the American Revolution because he realizes the violence and the bloodshed and everything gained and lost during the French and Indian War because he was a part of that. So this is actually, even though it's called French and Indian, it's between the English and the French over land in the Ohio River Valley. The colonists fought for England. The English won the war, but the war left them in debt. And whenever you're in debt, you need money. So by then, England decides they're going to put a series of acts or taxes against the colonists. Obviously, the colonists are not happy. In October of 1763, through the Proclamation of 1763, England banned colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. So anyone who was living on that side of the mountain range had to move back over. They were forced to by the military, and they no longer allowed people past that. They realized if people kept spreading out, they could no longer control them and what they did. Near the end of this war, the English officials were given search warrants that allowed them to search warehouses, homes, ships of colonists without a reason. So they didn't have to have a reason to go in and search you, but if you were breaking any of the king's laws or parliament's laws, then you would be fined or arrested. A colonist and Boston lawyer, James Otis, decided to challenge whether or not the warrants were legal in court. He argued they violated individual rights of the colonists. But as we'll see through history, colonists are not going to be treated the same as citizens living within the country of that time. So from there, after the French and Indian War, the British began restricting the activities. Just to recap, James Otis argued that these actions violated individual rights of the colonists. So by April of 1764, Parliament taxed sugar that was imported or brought into the colonies to pay off the war debt and to help pay for expenses of running the colonies. This act increased the duties or taxes on imported sugar and other items such as textiles, cloth, coffee, wine, and indigo, which is dye. In response to this, Boston businesses start boycotting some of English goods. Remember, boycott means they decide they will not purchase them. In the fall of 1764, Parliament ordered colonies to stop printing their own money, and colonists opposed the order because they feared it would upset the economy. So now they are boycotting, and they are not allowed to print their own money. This is just a recap, just what I just said. They decide to boycott, taxation being the biggest issue. In March of 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. Under the Stamp Act, all printed materials were taxed, including newspapers, pamphlets, bills, legal documents, licenses, almanacs, dice, and playing cards. And by stamps, it's not like to send mail kind of stamp. The money collected from the tax did not go to colonial legislator, but directly to England. So it didn't go into their own, like, colonies being better run. It went back to England for King George. Parliament ordered colonial legislators to pay for English soldiers that are located in the colonies. It also required colonists to house the troops and to supply them food. So now they are invading and living in your houses. And some of these people never even lived in England. So now they have British troops and soldiers moving into their houses, and they don't even really see themselves as being British. In May, Patrick Henry, a colonist, gave a speech to the Virginia legislature saying that only the Virginia legislature, not Parliament, can tax Virginians. In July, a secret group of colonists called the Sons of Liberty formed in some towns. They were opposed to the Stamp Act, and they used violence and intimidation to force all the English stamp agents to resign. They also stopped many colonists from ordering English goods. In the fall, representatives from 9 of the colonies met in New York and prepared a petition to be sent to King George III. In Parliament, the petition requested the Stamp Act and the Acts of 1764 stop being enforced. They stated that only colonial legislators can tax colonists, and taxation without representation violated the colonists' basic civil rights. So that will be the cry of the revolution. Taxation without representation is not fair. The colonists did not have anyone in Parliament, and Parliament is the ones who make the laws and decide how to tax people, and colonists do not have a member in Parliament to even have a say. So as a recap, Stamp Act is passed, the tax go to British, the colonists send a petition to the King George wanting this to go away. So they are concerned about their representation and their individual rights, and once again, taxation. Parliament ended the Stamp Act, but it was also passed the Declaratory Act. This act stated that England had total power to legislate any laws governing the colonies. The colonial concern, once again, is taxation. So Parliament passed the Townshend Revenue Act. This act taxed many items imported to the colonies: paper, tea, glass, lead, and paints. In response, colonists decide to refuse to purchase. They boycott the items. So instead of paying the tax, they just boycott. Once again, taxation. In February 1768, Samuel Adams from Massachusetts wrote a letter against taxation without representation. The idea that it is unfair to tax someone without giving them representation in government, and called for resistance to the Townshend Act. He encouraged other colonies to support the letter. In September, English ships sailed into the Boston harbor, and English troops set up permanent residence in Boston to keep order. So they pretty much closed down and take control of Boston. So they begin supporting the idea of taxation without representation, and they begin boycotting more goods. In response, the British send troops in and try to keep order. So once again, taxation, representation, your big items. Philadelphia businesses join the boycott against British goods. Later in the year, New Jersey, Rhode Island, North Carolina also joined the boycott. In March of 1770, the Boston Massacre happened. This event occurred when a large crowd of colonists crowded around and harassed some English soldiers. In response, the soldiers fired their guns into the crowd, killing 5 people and injuring 6. After the incident, the troops are withdrawn out of Boston. The same day as the Boston Massacre, Parliament ended all taxes on imports except for tea. So here you need to realize this picture gets painted and the story gets retold as it's just an incredible massacre. Yes, it's horrible. 5 people were shot and killed in response to this, but 5 people tend not to be a massacre of civilians. However you can push this helped incite the colonists to want to fight. In May of 1773, Parliament made the British East India Company the only company allowed to import tea into the colonies. This is called the Tea Act. Months later, in response to the Tea Act, the group's colonists board English ships in Boston and dump hundreds of chests of tea into the harbor. This becomes known as the Boston Tea Party. So they dress up, I believe, as Indians, Native Americans, and dump tea over the side of the ship in response. So no longer are we just boycotting, now we're acting out against it so no one can buy it. British troops kill 5 colonists, injure 6. Parliament gets rid of those. In response to the tea tax, they'll dump hundreds of chests of tea into the harbor. Taxation still being our major issue. In response to the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed a series of laws, and the colonists called them the Intolerable Acts. The first of the acts closed the port of Boston until all damage caused by the Tea Party is paid back. The English also put Massachusetts under military rule, and more troops arrived in the colony. The second of the acts made it illegal for royal officials to be brought to trial in the colonies. Instead, their trials were held in England. The third act ended the colonial government in Massachusetts, and instead allowed the royal governor to appoint colonial legislators. The fourth act ordered colonists to house troops, even in colonists' homes. In the fifth and final act, Parliament gave land claimed by Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Virginia to Canada. So, over here you have a summary of the Intolerable Acts. You can understand why this is not going to go well. In response to these acts, the First Continental Congress met in September. Every colony except Georgia sent representatives. The Congress declared that these acts should not be obeyed, and they began forming militias in the colonies. The Congress agreed to boycott English imports and to stop exporting goods to England. So the British passed a series of acts that closed the port of Boston, put Massachusetts under military rule, made it illegal to bring soldiers to trial in the colonies. So any of the soldiers that were British could not be put on trial for any of their actions, and they end the colonial government in Massachusetts. And now soldiers move into the colonists' homes for good. The colonists convene in the First Continental Congress and oppose the act and begin organizing militias. In early 1775, Massachusetts began forming militia units. Parliament declared the colony to be in a state of rebellion. A month later, King George passed an act ordering New England, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island colonies to trade only with England. On April 18th, Paul Revere rode from Boston to warn colonists and English troops that the British were coming. He doesn't actually make it, but that's a whole side note on how we've rewritten history a little bit. And then shots heard in Lexington and Concord are the shot heard round the world. Following month, the Second Continental Congress will meet in Philadelphia, and the Congress names George Washington as the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. June 17th, the first major battle of Bunker Hill occurred between the English and colonial troops. After the battle, the Second Continental Congress sent a petition to King George, asking him to reach an agreement with the colonists. The king refused to read the petition. Instead, King George proclaimed the colonists were rebelling. He ordered troops to end the rebellion. In addition to Parliament, ordered to end colonial trade. So the British and colonists began fighting. The Second Continental Congress sends the Olive Branch petition to King George, come to an agreement so fighting can stop. King George says no. All right, so Thomas Paine then writes Common Sense. The 50-page pamphlet criticized King George, argued for colonial independence. June 7th, Richard Henry Lee from Virginia presented a formal plan calling for the colonies to declare its independence from England. On June 11th, Congress created a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson is chosen by the committee to prepare the first draft of the Declaration, which he completed in one day. On June 28th, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence is presented to Congress. On July 4th, the Congress formally supported Jefferson's declaration, with copies sent to all the colonies. The actual signing of the document occurred on August 2nd, with most of the 55 members of Congress placing their names on the document. So, quick recap before my time runs out. The British and the colonists continue to battle. Congress agrees to pursue independence. The Declaration of Independence is signed. So, fill in your timeline, pause this, look up something if you can't get a good information from it, but let's not copy and paste over. You summarize, put the dates, let me know if you have some issues. All right?